To get started with weaving, we're going to talk about some basic vocabulary. I'm using this tan paper, and this is going to be my warp. The warp in weaving are the vertical parts of the weaving. We usually think about yarn, but today we're using paper, so it will be the vertical parts of the paper that don't move over and under. The weft will be the pieces that we cut and then move over, under through the warp. So we have the warp and the weft. To make the warp, I'm going to fold the paper in half, and I'm going to find the flap, the part of the paper that opens. I'm going to make a line across the bottom of my paper loom, and I'm going to make it about 2 fingers tall. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight, just across the bottom edge of the paper. And again, that's the flap where the paper opens. From the fold, the center of the paper, I'm going to draw lines that stop at this line, and those are also going to be about 2 fingers apart. I want to make them as straight as I can, and I want to stop at my first line that I drew along the flap. The next step is going to be to cut these lines. I'm going to turn the paper. I want to start at the fold and keep the paper folded, and I want to stop at that line before I get to the edge of the flap. If I get off of my lines a little bit, that's okay. These are really just for a guide. I want to stop at that line before I get to the flap. I'm going to make sure I keep my paper folded tightly. Now I have cut those lines and stopped at this line. Now it's time to open up my paper. And again, this is going to be my paper loom. These are my warp pieces. These stay in one spot. The weft pieces are the pieces of paper that are going to move through the warp. To make my weft pieces, I want to make sure that I am cutting them from the edge of the paper that is as wide as my warp. So I'm going to cut from the ends, and I want to cut some straight lines. I can also cut lines that curve a little bit. And I'm going to cut 2 green, and I'm going to cut 2 yellow, and then I'm going to also cut 2 blue. You can use any colors that you want to use for your weaving. And remember, we want to cut from the end of the paper because it's just as wide as our paper loom. Now I'm ready to start weaving. When we are weaving, there's one thing we have to remember, and that is over, under, over, under. I'm going to start over the first line of my warp, and then I'm going to lift and go under. Over one, under one. Over one, under one, over one, under one, over one, and under the last. And then I'm going to gently push them down until they stop. My next color, as I move up, I want to start the opposite of how I wove this green piece. So I started over the first, now I want to start under the first. Under one, over one. Under one, over one. Under one, over one. Under one, over one. Under one, and on the last warp, I will be over. And this is a pattern that switches back and forth or alternates. My next color, blue, will start the opposite of my last piece, my last weft piece. So since I started under with the yellow weft piece, I will need to start over here. Over the first one, under one. Over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, and then gently pull the weft piece to the bottom until it stops. When we're weaving, we are creating a pattern. Over, under, over, under, over, under. And it almost looks like a checkerboard or plaid print on fabric. I also want to create a pattern with my colors. So I started with green, then yellow, then blue. So I'm going to go back to green. Since I started over on my last weft paper, I need to start under on the first warp piece and continue my pattern of weaving over, under, over, under. After green, I have yellow, so my next color will be yellow. Since the last one I wove, I started under, now I start over. And this switches back and forth as we weave to the top of our paper. Here, I don't have enough space to fit my weft piece through. This is my last one. So I'm going to carefully just make another cut a little bit taller. I think I'm going to need another little bit of space here. And now this piece should fit through. So remember, we are working with the idea of patterns today. We have a pattern of weaving to get started to learn how to weave. We weave under one, over one, under one, over one. We also have a pattern with our colors. You can use any colors you would like. I chose green, yellow, and blue. So my pattern is green, yellow, blue, green, yellow, blue, green, yellow, blue, green, yellow, and I can't fit another blue close to the top. It's important to work from the bottom to the top so that we can push the weft pieces down tightly as we're working. And I'm noticing that these can all move down just a little bit more. We also have our over-under pattern as we look at the sides. So if I look at the left side, my first weft piece started over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over. And it's the reverse on this side. The last step for finishing our weaving will be to use a glue stick. And remember, we just want a little glue peeking out. We don't want to unwind the glue because then it smashes and breaks off. So we just need a little peeking out. And I'm going to carefully make sure that each weft piece is lined up with the edge of the paper where I have my warp pieces. And I'm going to glue the ends on both sides, front and back. And that will hold our weft pieces and won't let them move around anymore. If you would like to draw on top of your weaving, you could do that. You might choose shapes to draw in our pieces where we see the warp, which is here tan. You can even draw shapes on the weft pieces that you wove through the warp. When we're finished with our glue stick, remember to make sure that the glue goes back inside the tube and then put the lid on. Please remember to glue all of the ends of the weft pieces on the back and on the front, both sides. And again, if you would like to draw using crayons, markers, or a pencil, if you would like to draw on your weaving and decorate it, that's great too. Make sure that we have a pattern with our colors and with our weaving. Remember, under one, over one, under one, over one. And then on the next line above, we do the opposite. If we started under, we'll start over on the next. We're always looking at the one that we just wove to make sure that it's changing over and under. Do your best, and I look forward to seeing your weaving.